Welcome, Dark Night Tales. Tonight, we uncover one of the most hauntingly beautiful true stories ever recorded in history. The boy who never spoke but played like a master, Thomas Wiggins, 1859. Imagine a child who could not speak, could not live freely, yet could sit at a piano and perform music more complex than the world's greatest composers, perfectly, effortlessly, and without ever being taught. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and make sure you subscribe, because every story here is built on deep research, real historical records, and hours of true data verification that most people never take the time to uncover. Now, let's step into the shadows of history. Thomas Wiggins was born in 1849 in the state of Georgia, at a time when slavery was not just legal, but deeply woven into the foundation of American society. He was born into bondage, the child of enslaved parents who had no control over their own lives, let alone the future of their newborn son. From the moment Thomas entered the world, his fate was already decided by a system that saw him not as a human being, but as property. There was no birth certificate to mark his arrival with dignity, no celebration of a new life, only the quiet continuation of suffering passed through generations. As an infant, Thomas showed signs that something about him was different. He rarely made eye contact, did not respond to his name, and never learned to speak in the way other children did. In a society that had no understanding of neurological conditions, these traits were not seen as differences, but as defects. To enslavers, a child who did not speak was considered broken, useless, or disposable. Yet what no one could see at the time was that Thomas's silence was not emptiness. It was the space where something extraordinary was forming. His parents, themselves trapped in chains, could do little to protect him. When Thomas was still very young, his enslavers sold the Wiggins family to another owner, tearing apart any sense of safety they might have had. This transfer of ownership would become one of the most defining moments of Thomas's life, because it placed him in an environment where sound, rather than words, would become his language. While enslaved children were usually forced into labor as soon as they could walk, Thomas was instead observed, watched closely, as if people sensed that he was not an ordinary child. Born blind, unable to speak, and enslaved in one of the darkest chapters of human history, Thomas Wiggins began life with every possible barrier placed in front of him. And yet, within those crushing limits, destiny was quietly preparing one of the most mysterious musical minds the world would ever know. His birth into slavery was not just the beginning of his life, it was the beginning of a story that would expose both the cruelty of humanity and the unbelievable power of the human mind. From the earliest years of Thomas Wiggins' childhood, it became clear that although he lived in near total silence from the outside world, sound ruled his inner universe. He could not speak, and he could not see, yet he reacted to noises with an intensity that startled everyone around him. Ordinary sounds, a door creaking, footsteps on wooden floors, distant church bells, even the rhythm of rain hitting the ground, would cause him to stop completely, tilting his head as if decoding a secret message hidden within the noise. It was as though his mind was constantly recording the world, not through sight or language, but through vibration and tone. People soon noticed that Thomas didn't just hear sounds, he absorbed them. When someone hummed a tune near him, he would repeat it back perfectly using his voice, despite never forming words. If a sound was played once, it stayed with him forever. Horses passing by, machinery clanking, conversations drifting through open windows, Thomas recreated these sounds with astonishing accuracy, mimicking pitch, rhythm, and timing without error. This wasn't imitation learned through practice, it was instant and automatic, as if his brain was wired to capture sound the way a mirror captures light. At a time when there was no understanding of autism, savant syndrome, or sensory processing differences, these behaviors were viewed with confusion and superstition. Some believed the child was possessed. Others thought his silence meant a lack of intelligence. Yet the truth was the opposite. Thomas's inability to speak did not signal emptiness, it revealed a mind so overwhelmed by sound that words were unnecessary. Noise was not background to him, it was structure, emotion, and meaning. This heightened sensitivity would soon become the foundation of his musical genius. Long before he ever touched a piano, Thomas Wiggins had already mastered the world through sound alone. Every noise became a lesson, every rhythm a language. These early signs were not just quirks of a strange child, they were the first echoes of a gift so rare that history would struggle to explain it. The discovery of Thomas Wiggins' musical genius did not come through careful study or formal testing. It happened by accident, in a way so sudden and unbelievable that those who witnessed it struggled to accept what they were seeing. As a very young child, Thomas was often drawn toward places filled with sound. He would instinctively move toward music, following vibrations across rooms, as if guided by an invisible force. One day, while near a piano, he placed his small hands on the keys, and in that moment, history quietly shifted. Without any instruction, Thomas began to strike the keys in patterns that made sense. These were not random noises or childish banging. The notes formed structured melodies, harmonies that followed musical rules he had never been taught. When someone played a short piece on the piano, Thomas immediately repeated it back, perfectly, after hearing it only once. No mistakes, no hesitation. It was as if the music had already existed inside his mind, waiting only for an instrument to release it. Witnesses were stunned. Pianists who had trained for decades could not replicate what this silent, blind child was doing effortlessly. Even more shocking was his ability to expand on what he heard. Thomas didn't just copy music, he understood it instinctively. He could transpose pieces into different keys, combine multiple melodies at once, and improvise complex compositions that sounded deliberate and emotionally complete. In an era where black enslaved children were denied even basic education, this level of mastery was considered impossible. Word of the boy's abilities spread quickly. What began as disbelief turned into fascination, and then into obsession. Instead of asking how such a gift was possible, people asked how it could be used. His genius, once discovered, was no longer seen as a miracle, it became a commodity. The moment Thomas Wiggins' musical talent was revealed, his life changed forever. His discovery was not just the unveiling of a prodigy, it marked the beginning of a lifetime of exploitation, control, and forced performance, all built upon a gift the world could not explain, but was eager to profit from. Thomas Wiggins' first true interaction with a piano was not planned, not taught, and not guided. It was instinctive, almost inevitable. Drawn by sound alone, the blind and silent child moved toward the instrument as if it were calling to him. Those present expected chaos, the random striking of keys by a curious child. Instead, what unfolded left everyone frozen in disbelief. The moment Thomas touched the piano, his hands moved with confidence, pressing keys in deliberate sequences that formed clear, intentional music. He explored the piano not as an unfamiliar object, but as something already known to him. Each key seemed mapped in his mind. He learned the entire keyboard through touch and sound within hours, memorizing distances between notes, understanding pitch relationships without explanation. When someone played a melody near him, Thomas repeated it immediately, accurately capturing not just the notes, but the emotion, tempo, and phrasing. There was no trial and error, no learning curve. The piano became his voice, replacing words he never spoke. What shocked witnesses even more was Thomas's physical technique. He played with both hands independently, producing layered harmonies far beyond beginner ability. He could mimic thunder, rain, marching feet, and human voices using the piano alone, turning everyday sounds into musical expression. Observers realized this was not mimicry, it was translation. Thomas was converting the world of sound into music in real time. This first encounter with the piano revealed something profound. Thomas Wiggins did not learn music, he recognized it. The instrument was not teaching him, it was unlocking something already complete within his mind. From that moment forward, the piano was no longer just an instrument in a room. It became the gateway through which one of history's most mysterious musical minds would be fully revealed. As Thomas Wiggins' abilities continued to astonish those around him, it became clear that his talent went far beyond natural skill. He possessed what musicians would later recognize as perfect pitch, the rare ability to identify, reproduce, and manipulate any musical note instantly, without reference. If a single key was pressed anywhere in the room, Thomas could name it through sound alone or reproduce it flawlessly on the piano. To him, every tone had a precise identity, as clear and fixed as a color to someone with sight. Even more astonishing was his photographic musical memory. Thomas needed to hear a piece only once, sometimes even partially, and it would be permanently stored in his mind. He could replay entire compositions note for note, including complex classical works, without ever seeing sheet music. Mistakes were almost non-existent. Dynamics, timing, and emotional nuance were all preserved exactly as originally heard, as if his brain recorded music with mechanical precision. But his memory did not stop at simple reproduction. Thomas could take a song he heard once and instantly modify it, changing keys, altering tempo, or weaving it together with other melodies simultaneously. He could play multiple pieces at the same time, one with each hand, while humming a third tune, all perfectly aligned in rhythm and harmony. For trained musicians, this was beyond comprehension. For Thomas, it seemed effortless. In an age that lacked scientific language to describe savant-level cognition, people struggled to explain what they were witnessing. Some called it divine, others unnatural. But the truth was simpler and far more remarkable. Thomas Wiggins' mind processed music as a complete language, not learned but innate. His perfect pitch and memory were not party tricks. They were the foundation of a genius so rare that, even today, it challenges modern understanding of the human brain. Expands 6 keynote fully detail, keynote 6e ability to replicate complex compositions instantly. One of the most unsettling and awe-inspiring aspects of Thomas Wiggins' genius was his ability to replicate complex musical compositions instantly, without practice, correction, or instruction. While even the most trained musicians required years of study to master difficult pieces, Thomas needed only a single hearing. The moment a composition ended, he could sit at the piano and reproduce it in full. Every note, every pause, every shift in emotion, exactly as it had been played. These were not simple tunes. Thomas replicated advanced classical works filled with rapid passages, layered harmonies, and demanding technical structures. Pieces that challenged professional pianists were rendered effortlessly by a boy who had never seen sheet music and could not speak a single word. His fingers moved with unnatural precision, never hesitating, never searching for the next key. It was as if time itself had paused, allowing the music to pass straight through his ears and into his hands. Even more disturbing to witnesses was his accuracy. If a performer made a mistake while playing a piece, Thomas repeated the mistake perfectly, proving he was not interpreting the music, but recording it exactly as it occurred. This level of precision convinced many that his mind functioned differently from ordinary human memory. Music critics and scholars of the era openly admitted they had no explanation for what they were witnessing. To Thomas, replication was not effort, it was instinct. Music entered his mind fully formed, requiring no translation. His instant mastery exposed the limitations of contemporary science and forced people to confront an uncomfortable truth. Intelligence did not always look the way society expected it to. In a world that dismissed him as broken because he could not speak, Thomas Wiggins demonstrated a level of cognitive power so profound that it continues to defy explanation even today. Once Thomas Wiggins' abilities could no longer be contained within private rooms, he was pushed onto public stages at an age when most children were still learning how to speak. By the time he was only 8 years old, Thomas was already performing in front of large audiences across the United States. Crowds gathered not just to hear music, but to witness what many believed was an impossible phenomenon: a blind, silent black child executing complex piano performances with absolute mastery. These performances were carefully framed to shock and astonish. Audiences were told that Thomas had no formal training, no education, and no understanding of what he played, claims meant to heighten the mystery, even when they stripped him of agency and dignity. On stage, he was often asked to perform challenges, replicating newly played pieces, improvising on unfamiliar melodies, or playing multiple songs simultaneously. Each time, Thomas delivered flawlessly, leaving theaters silent before erupting into applause. Yet behind the admiration was exploitation. Thomas did not choose to perform. He was forced to tour relentlessly, sometimes playing for hours without rest. His handlers controlled every aspect of his life: where he slept, what he ate, and how often he performed. While audiences praised him as a miracle, the child himself remained trapped, unable to consent, unable to speak, and unable to escape. His youth made the spectacle even more unsettling: a genius displayed before the world, yet denied freedom. These early public performances cemented Thomas Wiggins as a global sensation, but they also marked the loss of his childhood. The stage became both his voice and his prison. Though the world celebrated the music he created, few questioned the cost at which it was produced. His rise to fame was breathtaking, but it was built on silence, control, and a child too young to defend himself. As Thomas Wiggins' fame grew, so did the cruelty surrounding his life. His extraordinary musical talent did not earn him freedom, it deepened his enslavement. Those who controlled him quickly realized that Thomas was not seen as a child or a human being, but as a profitable spectacle. Every performance generated money, and none of it belonged to him. He was rented, exhibited, and paraded before wealthy audiences who marveled at his genius while ignoring the chains that still bound him. Thomas was forced to perform relentlessly, often under exhausting conditions. He played multiple shows a day, sometimes for hours, with little rest or care for his physical or emotional well-being. His handlers dictated everything: when he slept, where he traveled, and what music he played. Because he could not speak, he could not refuse. His silence became a tool of control, allowing others to decide his fate without resistance. Even after slavery was legally abolished, Thomas's exploitation did not end. Legal guardianship replaced ownership, but the abuse remained the same. His earnings, worth millions in today's value, were controlled entirely by others. Contracts were signed on his behalf, Tours were arranged without his consent, and his identity was shaped to suit public fascination rather than truth. He was marketed as a curiosity, not protected as a person. The most tragic irony of Thomas Wiggins' life is this: music gave him a voice powerful enough to move nations, yet it also became the reason he was never free. His talent, instead of liberating him, trapped him in a system that valued profit over humanity. His story forces us to confront a painful reality. Genius does not guarantee dignity, and in Thomas's case, it was exploited in the cruelest way imaginable. Thomas Wiggins' life quickly became a never-ending journey he never chose. Once his performances proved profitable, he was sent on constant tours, traveling from city to city, state to state, often across dangerous and exhausting routes. For most children, travel meant discovery and joy. For Thomas, it meant confinement, repetition, and complete loss of control. His days were dictated by schedules he did not understand and demands he could not refuse. Every aspect of his life was monitored. He was kept under strict supervision, rarely left alone, and often isolated from anyone who might show him genuine care. Practice was not optional. Performances were not requests. If an audience demanded an encore, Thomas was forced to play again, regardless of fatigue. His sensory sensitivity, once the source of his genius, made loud crowds and constant noise overwhelming, yet no allowance was made for his condition. What made this control even more disturbing was how it was disguised as protection. His handlers claimed they were caring for him, guiding him, and managing his best interests. In reality, they controlled his finances, movements, and personal interactions. Thomas did not know how much money he earned, where it went, or why he was constantly being moved. The world saw a traveling prodigy. Behind the scenes was a man living under invisible chains. This forced touring stripped Thomas of stability, safety, and identity. He was not allowed to settle, to rest, or to simply exist without performing. Music, once his natural language, became an obligation. His life under constant control reveals a haunting truth. Even after legal freedom, exploitation can continue in quieter, more deceptive forms, and for Thomas Wiggins, the road never truly led to liberation. Thomas Wiggins never learned to speak in the way the world expected. He did not form sentences, could not explain his thoughts, and could not defend himself with words. To 19th century society, this silence was mistaken for emptiness or lack of intelligence. In reality, Thomas was not without language. He had simply mastered a different one. Music became his voice, his grammar, and his way of communicating with a world that refused to listen. While words failed him, music flowed effortlessly. Through the piano, Thomas expressed joy, tension, sorrow, and wonder with astonishing clarity. He could respond to emotions in a room, adjusting tempo and harmony as if reading the feelings of those around him. Where others spoke, Thomas played. Each melody carried intention, each chord a statement. Audiences often felt deeply moved, without understanding why, unaware that they were listening to a conversation, one spoken entirely in sound. His silence also protected his inner world. Without spoken language, no one truly knew what Thomas understood or how deeply he perceived reality. He followed routines, reacted strongly to certain sounds, and used repetition to find comfort, traits that modern experts recognize as signs of autism. Yet despite these limitations, or perhaps because of them, his musical comprehension surpassed that of most trained composers. Music was not learned, it was instinctive cognition. Thomas Wiggins' life challenges the narrow definition of intelligence. He proved that communication does not require words, and that brilliance can exist in silence. Though he never spoke a single sentence, his music spoke across continents and centuries. In a world that judged worth by speech and conformity, Thomas revealed a profound truth. The human mind can express itself in ways far more powerful than language ever could. During Thomas Wiggins' lifetime, there was no language to describe autism, neurodivergence, or savant syndrome. Behaviors we recognize today as neurological differences were misunderstood, feared, or dismissed. Thomas's silence, repetitive actions, extreme sensitivity to sound, and reliance on routine confused 19th century observers. Instead of being studied with compassion, he was labeled as strange, defective, or even less than human, despite demonstrating intelligence far beyond societal norms. Modern historians and neuroscientists strongly believe Thomas exhibited traits consistent with autism spectrum condition with savant abilities. His extraordinary memory, perfect pitch, and ability to process complex musical structures instantly align closely with what is now understood about savant cognition. However, in his era, genius was expected to look and behave a certain way: articulate, educated, controlled. Thomas shattered that expectation. His mind worked differently, and because of that difference, it accessed abilities others could not. What makes Thomas's case so important historically is how it exposed the limitations of scientific understanding at the time. Scholars attempted to explain his talent through religion, superstition, or racial myths rather than neuroscience. Some claimed his abilities were automatic and unconscious, denying him creative agency. These interpretations allowed society to admire his output while refusing to acknowledge his full humanity. Thomas Wiggins stands as early evidence that genius and disability are not opposites. His life forces a re-examination of intelligence itself, not as something measured by speech or conformity, but as the brain's unique way of interacting with the world. Though history failed to understand him, his story now plays a crucial role in recognizing neurodivergent brilliance and challenging the myths that once kept it in chains. Thomas Wiggins lived in a world that lacked both the knowledge and the willingness to understand him. His silence, blindness, and unusual behaviors were not seen as signs of a different neurological condition, but as proof, wrongly assumed, of intellectual inferiority. In the 19th century, intelligence was measured by speech, obedience, and social conformity. Because Thomas fit none of these standards, society failed to recognize the depth of his mind, even while profiting from the brilliance it produced. Many observers believed Thomas played music mechanically, without emotion or understanding. This belief stripped him of creative ownership, allowing audiences to enjoy his performances without confronting the truth that a child they considered less than was outperforming the greatest trained musicians of the era. Others leaned into superstition, calling his abilities divine, cursed, or unnatural. These labels made his genius easier to admire from a distance while avoiding the responsibility to protect or respect him as a human being. Race intensified this misunderstanding. As a black man born into slavery, Thomas was already viewed through a lens of prejudice. Pseudoscientific theories of the time falsely claimed intellectual inferiority in black people, forcing scholars into contradiction when faced with Thomas's abilities. Instead of challenging racist beliefs, many chose to deny his agency, insisting his talent was instinctual rather than intellectual, something that happened through him, not because of him. This collective misunderstanding had devastating consequences, because society did not see Thomas as fully capable or fully human. It felt justified in controlling him, exploiting him, and deciding his life without consent. His story reveals how ignorance can be just as destructive as cruelty. Thomas Wiggins was not misunderstood because he was unknowable. He was misunderstood because society refused to expand its understanding of what intelligence, humanity, and dignity truly mean. Thomas Wiggins, often remembered by the stage name Blind Tom, left behind a legacy that is as powerful as it is tragic. He died in 1908, having spent most of his life performing for others, yet owning almost nothing, not even the rights to his own music. Despite earning vast sums of money through his performances, Thomas lived and died under control, his genius celebrated while his freedom was denied. History recorded his talent, but for many years it failed to honor his humanity. Musically, Thomas's impact was extraordinary. He composed hundreds of original pieces, many of which were lost or credited to others. His abilities challenged every assumption about learning, memory, and intelligence. Even today, trained musicians struggle to comprehend how someone without formal education, sight, or speech could achieve such mastery. His life continues to be studied as one of the earliest and most compelling examples of savant-level genius in recorded history. In recent years, historians have begun to reclaim Thomas's story, stripping away the caricatures and myths that once surrounded him. He is now recognized not as a curiosity, but as a musical prodigy and composer, a neurodivergent genius whose life exposes the intersection of racism, disability, and exploitation. His legacy forces modern audiences to confront uncomfortable truths about how society treats those who are different. Even when they are extraordinary, Thomas Wiggins' true legacy is not only the music he played, but the questions he left behind. How many voices have been silenced because they did not speak the right way? How many geniuses were exploited rather than protected? Though he never spoke, Thomas Wiggins continues to speak through history, his story echoing as both a warning and a reminder that true brilliance deserves dignity, understanding, and freedom.